years and years. But can you imagine that? He was still terminal, but he said, you've only got 15 years. That's a little better, isn't it? Than being told you've only got a few hours. By the way, we're all terminal. You just don't know how much time you've got. Poor Hezekiah, he saw the clock ticking and he knew exactly he had 15 years and then that was going to be it. So that would still make you nervous, wouldn't it? If you knew the Lord was coming tomorrow, how would you feel today? What if you knew it was 1 week? What if you knew it was 1 year? Would you pace your revival according to how much time you had? Would you measure your repentance and reform based on how much time you had? Or would you reform completely in the next 24 hours? So why are you waiting now? You might only have a day. We kind of gamble with our eternity, don't we? He's not the only example. There's others in the Bible where God relented of his plan. And because of the prophecies. If you read in your lesson, there's a section here in Jeremiah chapter 18, verse 7 through 10. I'll read this one for you. Jeremiah 18, verse 7 through 10. The instant that I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to pluck up, to pull down, to destroy, when I pronounce some prophecy of destruction against it, if that nation against whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent, meaning I'll change my mind, of the disaster that I have thought to bring upon it. And the instant I speak concerning a nation, concerning a kingdom, to build, to plant it, to bless it in other words, if it does evil in my sight, so that it does not obey my voice, then I'll relent concerning the good, which I said I would benefit them by. So, some have pointed out there's a couple of examples. There's one given in the lesson where Ellen White made a prediction that did not happen. It was an example of a conditional prophecy. It should not shake anyone up. For instance, in 1856, Ellen White declared, I was shown, speaking of a conference where they were attending, I was shown the company present at the conference, said the angel, some food for worms, some subjects of the 7 last plagues, some will be alive and upon the earth to be translated at the coming of Jesus. They had this conference, they were preaching the second coming of Christ was imminent, and God's people were going everywhere preaching, so the angel gave her this message, she gave it, but it didn't happen. Well, why didn't it happen? Well, because Jesus' coming is conditional on preaching the gospel in all the world. He said the gospel of this kingdom, Matthew 24:14, will be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations. Then the end will come. They were doing it. It was going like a train around the world. And then they stopped. And so the Lord's coming was postponed. Did God intend for the children of Israel to spend 40 years in the wilderness? Did the Lord say that they were going to go 3 days journey into the wilderness, they'd sacrifice to the Lord and then make a beeline for the promised land? But that's not how it happened. Why? Because the people messed up there at the Jordan River. So was Moses not a prophet because they didn't go straight in? Or did God change his mind because the people lost faith? That's what happened back 100 years ago. The Lord could have come by now. Matter of fact, there's a statement here in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 9, page 29. If every soldier of Christ had done his duty, if every watchman on the walls of Zion had given the trumpet a certain sound, the world might ere this have heard the message of warning, but the work is years behind. While men have slept, Satan has stolen a march upon us. As a matter of fact, there's several examples where she says that the Lord tarried because we have not done what we could have done. So that doesn't disqualify a person as a prophet. If you do that, then Moses is disqualified, and Jonah is disqualified, and Isaiah is disqualified, and Nathan. You remember, as a matter of fact, I might have already shared this with you, that example where Nathan the prophet told David, when David wanted to build the temple for the Lord, he said, God is with you, go for it. Well, Nathan was speaking from his own judgment. After Nathan left, God said, go back and tell David, you're not going to build my temple. You're a bloody man. Not only because he was a man of war, but because he had taken innocent blood when he killed Uriah. He says, your son will build my house. So Nathan first spoke from his own judgment. Not everything a prophet says is a thus saith the Lord. Right? Karen reminded me this week. Matter of fact, I've got a picture of this, I think, later in our slides this morning. How many of you remember when Abraham went to see Abimelech, the Philistine king, during a time of famine? And he was afraid because his wife, though she was getting up there in years, was still just a knockout beauty. And he was afraid that they would kill him for his wife that was already getting her Denny's discount. And that's hard to believe. Sarah must have been really pretty, because when she's like 70 years old, Abraham is afraid for his life when he went to Egypt and when he went to the Philistines that they're going to kill him for his wife. So he says, just say you're my sister. Well, is that being honest? Yeah, she was his half-sister, but that wasn't being honest, because he was avoiding the truth that they were married. They'd made a covenant. You're not supposed to hide that. So here he is. All these plagues fall on Abimelech. And God says to Abimelech, well, the reason for this is because you've taken that man and you're about to introduce her into your harem, and she's married. He said, I didn't know. And God said, I know you didn't know. That's why you're still alive. So tell you what, you go to Abraham, he's a prophet, have him pray for you. Wait a second, he's the one that caused the whole problem. And God says, go to Abraham and have him pray for you, and I'll forgive and heal your household. And Abraham was human, but he was still a prophet. Did you get that? We forget that. You got the example in the Bible where Samuel is told to go to Bethlehem and anoint a king, right? And he goes and he sees all these dashing and daring, tall, dark, and handsome sons of Jesse, except the youngest one. And he's looking for someone to replace Saul. And so he's thinking, tall, strong, striking. And he looks at the oldest one, I think it's Eliab. And he says, surely the anointed of the Lord is before me. That's what Samuel said to himself. And God said, don't look on his height or his outward appearance. God looks on the heart. He's not the one. Well, prophets had their opinions. And it's a mistake to think that every time a prophet said anything, it was a message from God. Prophets had flesh and blood. They were humans. Prophets were, see, Jesus was the Son of God who was sinless. He was a prophet. He's the only sinless prophet, was Jesus. Right? Every other prophet was from sinners that God saved. They became holy men and women. But they were not perfect in the sense that they never spoke from their own judgment and they never made mistakes. Was Jonah a prophet? Did Jonah go the right direction when he went to Tarshish? All right, so Ellen White did a lot better than Jonah, let me tell you. And so you start applying the Bible tests, and you can see that I had another example I was going to give you. I told you about Nathan, the prophet, and I told you about Saul. Told you about Abraham. That's probably enough to settle that point. Another criteria is, of course, the prophecies come true. Now, the vast majority of Ellen White's prophecies, some things are still to be fulfilled because they're in the future, have been fulfilled. I gave you out of, what did I say, 1.5 million words, I gave you one example of something that people thought was questioned, and it was a conditional prophecy. But you think about her prediction, for instance, she pretty clearly foretold the San Francisco earthquake. I saw that up on the screen, Cheryl, a minute ago. Maybe you can jump back to that. There we go. There's a picture of the San Francisco earthquake. Took place in 1906. Where's their prophecy of that? Put the words up there. There we go. 1902, Ellen White wrote, not long hence, these cities will suffer under the judgments of God. San Francisco and Oakland are becoming as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord will visit them in wrath. Well, not long after she made that statement was this historic earthquake. It wasn't just like the little shakers that we have in California all the time. I mean, it was devastating. Some have wondered, she made another prediction here about New York City. And I'm not weighing in on this. I'm just telling you it's worth considering. On one occasion, this is Last Day Events, page 113. When in New York City, I was in the night seasons called upon to behold buildings rising story after story towards heaven. Well, that's interesting because, before they introduced steel into the construction of New York, there was a limit on how high they could go with brick buildings. But after the engineers understood using reinforced concrete how much higher they could go, they broke this 20-story barrier that they had, like with a Woolworth building. There was a barrier, and they just went on up to the heavens. She saw that in prophecy before it happened. The Empire State Building came after she said this.